Before we begin, don't forget to subscribe for more chilling true crime stories. Stories that reveal the darkest corners of the human mind and remind us how fragile the line between ordinary and monstrous can be. Plainfield, Wisconsin was the kind of place where nothing ever seemed out of the ordinary. A tiny farming town with fewer than 1,000 people, the cold winds swept across the empty fields, rattling the windows of quiet homes. Everyone knew everyone. People waved at neighbors. Kids played in dusty roads. And among them all walked a thin, soft-spoken man named Edward Theodore Gein. To most locals, Ed was harmless. Strange maybe. Withdrawn? Definitely. But harmless. He worked odd jobs, fixed fences, cleaned up at the hardware store, and did chores for families who needed an extra hand. His laugh was awkward, his smile uneasy, his eyes always shifting like he was trying to decode the world around him. What the town never truly understood, what they couldn't understand, was the depth of silence behind his front door. The Gein farmhouse stood alone on a barren stretch of land, miles from town. Rotting wood, shattered windows, the kind of place that even hunters avoided. It had once been ruled by Augusta Gein, Ed's deeply religious, fear-driven mother. Her voice had scarred the farmhouse walls, teaching Ed that the world was evil, that women were agents of sin, and that he alone needed protection from corruption. When she died, something inside Ed broke, quietly, like a beam splitting in an old barn. No one heard it. No one noticed. But Plainfield would soon feel the weight of that split. Ed boarded up his mother's room, sealing it in time. The rest of the house decayed, swallowed by loneliness. Nights on the farm were empty, isolating. The wind howled through the fields, and Ed, desperate for companionship, began spending more time in graveyards than in town. People whispered about him. The jokes started small. Ed's odd. Ed's off. Ed ain't right. But no one expected danger. Not from Quiet Ed. Not from the man who helped fix their barns and clean their gutters. On the morning of November 16, 1957, something felt different in Plainfield. The air hung heavier. Snow had begun forming thin sheets of frost over the roads. And at Hogan's hardware store, a cash register sat open, unattended. The owner, Bernice Wardens, was nowhere to be found. A smear of dried blood marked the floor. A single spent rifle cartridge glimmered under the counter. Sheriff's deputies searched the store, then the back room, then the alley behind it. Locals gathered outside with whispers and wide eyes. The entire town knew the Wardens. This wasn't normal. This wasn't Plainfield. The register slip in the machine held one of the last names printed, Ed Gein. And just like that, the silence of Plainfield cracked open. Deputies drove toward the Gein property with a sense of unease weighing on their shoulders. The sun was melting into the horizon, leaving streaks of orange and red across the sky, colors that felt far too symbolic for what they were about to walk into. The farmhouse loomed in the distance like a grave marker. No smoke from the chimney. No lights. No sound but the wind pressing against the broken boards. Sheriff Schley stepped out first, crunching through the frost-covered grass. The officers approached the door, flashlights trembling slightly in their hands. The moment they stepped inside, the cold hit them first. Then the smell. A thick, sour odor, like damp earth mixed with something rotten. Something unmistakably human. One deputy gagged instantly. Another covered his mouth with a sleeve. Their flashlights swept across the room, revealing piles of debris, bottles, newspapers, scraps of clothing. But amid the clutter were objects that turned their blood to ice. A lampshade stitched from skin. A bowl made from a skull. Masks, faces, carved with chilling precision, hanging like trophies on the wall. They backed away, hands shaking, breaths quivering. No training had prepared them for this. No manual had instructions for the horrors born on this farm. Then someone shouted. They'd found something in the shed. The beam of a flashlight cut through the dark, illuminating a shape hanging from the rafters. Headless, dressed like Gein, frozen stiff in the winter air. It was Bernice Wardens. Her torso had been sliced open. Her body drained. It was a butchering, not a killing. A display. The crime scene became a nightmare maze. Every drawer, every box, every corner held another unspeakable artifact. Those organs. clothing made from human skin, objects fashioned with a grotesque kind of craftsmanship. But behind the depravity, one detail chilled investigators the most. Nearly all the remains belonged to women who had recently died. Ed confessed quickly, sitting calmly in custody as if he had just been caught stealing fence posts. His voice was flat, emotionless. He told them about grave robbing, how he visited cemeteries and dug up bodies that looked like Mother, how he used the remains to become her, to keep her spirit alive. He claimed he didn't remember killing Bernice Wardens. He said he fell into a daze. The deputies looked at him, seeing the truth in his detached expression. He wasn't lying. He was broken, and dangerously so. Outside, the townspeople gathered, horrified. Parents held their children close. Neighbors whispered prayers. Plainfield had become a place that would forever be linked to one of the darkest chapters in American true crime history. And Ed? He simply stared at the floor, humming to himself, calm, quiet, content, as if his entire world had finally been discovered and he no longer needed to hide. In the county jail, Ed Gein sat alone in a small, dimly lit room. His hands rested calmly on the metal table in front of him. Outside the door, officers whispered, debated, tried to make sense of the impossible. How long had this been happening? How had no one noticed? How could someone so quiet be capable of such darkness? Psychiatrists soon arrived to evaluate him, and what they uncovered only deepened the tragedy. Ed wasn't a monster in the traditional sense. He was a deeply damaged man shaped by years of psychological abuse, isolation, and trauma. He spoke about his mother with reverence, his voice softening whenever he mentioned her name. To Ed, Augusta wasn't just a parent, she was an idol, a judge, a god. Her teachings had become the framework of his mind, twisting reality into something unrecognizable. When she died, he hadn't lost a mother. He'd lost his entire world. The psychiatrist described him as schizophrenic, suffering from severe delusions and a complete detachment from reality. He lived in a mental fog, unable to distinguish right from wrong, fantasy from life. In his mind, the things he created weren't horrors. They were shrines. The trial was short. The evidence was overwhelming. But Ed was declared not guilty by reason of insanity and was sent to the Central State Hospital for the criminally insane. He lived there quietly, just as he had lived in Plainfield, reading, smiling politely, helping staff with odd tasks. If visitors didn't know who he was, they might have mistaken him for a janitor or a groundskeeper. But beneath that quiet exterior stood one of the most disturbing figures in American crime history, a man whose actions would inspire horror movies, books, and nightmares for generations. And yet, in interviews, Ed often seemed confused about why people were so interested in him. He claimed he never meant to hurt anyone. He spoke with the same gentle awkwardness he had in Plainfield, as if he truly believed he had done nothing wrong. In 1984, at the age of 77, Ed Gein died from respiratory failure after a long battle with cancer. His passing made headlines across the country, but Plainfield reacted with mixed emotions, some relief, some sorrow, and a lingering fear that the scars of his crimes would never fully heal. Today, his name remains synonymous with horror, but behind the legend was a man shaped by cruelty, isolation, and a mind fractured beyond recognition. A reminder that evil isn't always loud. Sometimes it whispers. Sometimes it smiles. Sometimes it fixes your fence and helps you carry groceries. And sometimes, behind the quietest doors, darkness grows in silence. Long before the horrors discovered in the Gein farmhouse, long before the name Ed Gein echoed through American nightmares, there was a quiet little boy growing up under the cold shadow of his mother's voice. Ed was born in 1906 to George and Augusta Gein. George was an alcoholic with a short temper and a long list of failures behind him. Augusta, on the other hand, believed she carried divine authority, God's personal mission to keep her sons pure in a world she viewed as sinful and diseased. From the moment Ed could walk, Augusta filled his ears with sermons about the filth of women, the wickedness of desire, and the dangers of anyone outside their family. She read to him from the Bible, but never the comforting passages, only the harsh judgments, the punishments, the wrath. Ed absorbed it all like dry soil takes the rain. The Gein home was isolated even by Wisconsin standards. Their farm was miles from neighbors, and Augusta insisted on keeping her boys far from town. Other children whispered that the Gein boys were strange, but the truth was simpler than that. Ed had never been allowed to be a child. He watched life happen through windows. At school, he spoke softly, laughed at the wrong moments, and stared too long at things that others ignored. He was bullied, mocked, called names, yet he never fought back. He simply walked home to Augusta, where the lectures waited. To Ed, her word mattered more than the world. His older brother, Henry, wasn't as obedient. He questioned their mother's teachings. He told Ed that Augusta was too controlling, too cruel, too fanatical. Henry wanted a normal life, a family, freedom. Augusta saw this as betrayal. One afternoon in 1944, a brush fire broke out near the farm. The brothers tried to contain it, but as night fell, Henry vanished. Hours later, Ed led deputies straight to his brother's body, an action that raised eyebrows almost immediately. Henry lay on his back, unburned, with bruises on his head. The official report claimed asphyxiation. But the deputies never forgot the look on Ed's face as he stared at his brother's corpse, a strange mixture of calmness and confusion, almost as if he wasn't sure whether he should mourn or simply accept what had happened. After Henry's death, Ed and Augusta were alone. The farmhouse grew even quieter, and Augusta's grip tightened even further. Ed became her caretaker, her servant, her disciple. Then, in 1945, she suffered a stroke. When she died later that year, Ed was left standing alone in a world she had warned him never to trust. Something inside him cracked. Not loudly, not violently, just a small, irreversible fracture that eventually became a void, one he would spend the rest of his life trying to fill. And the world would pay the price. After Augusta's death, the Gein farmhouse transformed from a strict, religious home into something far stranger, an empty shell filled with dust, loneliness, and the ghosts Ed refused to let go. He sealed Augusta's room like a tomb. No footprints, no dust disturbed, no light allowed to touch it. It remained a museum of the past, a shrine to the woman who had shaped him. But the rest of the house? It began to rot alongside Ed's mind. He lived mostly in the kitchen, sleeping beside the stove to stay warm during brutal Wisconsin winters. Newspapers piled high, tools scattered, dishes crusted with old food. In the silence of those long nights, Ed's thoughts circled back to one thing. Mother. He missed her voice, her rules, her certainty, and the longing turned into obsession. Psychiatrists later called it a psychotic break, but to Ed, it felt like a calling, a whisper in the dark urging him to bring Mother back. He began reading books on anatomy, funerary practices, even headhunting tribes. The ideas that filled him were twisted, but his loneliness made them feel like guidance. Then one night, Ed walked into the cemetery. At first, he claimed he went only to visit Augusta's grave. But under the pale moonlight, surrounded by rows of headstones, something inside him shifted. A need, a pull. He opened his first grave with clumsy, trembling hands. What he found wasn't horrifying to him, it was comforting. A body he could shape, preserve, not as a victim, but as a project, a replacement. Soon the grave robberies became more frequent. He watched obituaries like a hunter studying migrations. When a middle-aged woman died, someone who resembled Augusta, Ed felt it was a sign. He dug up at least 10 graves, though investigators later suspected the number was higher. He brought home parts, clothing, organs, sometimes entire bodies. But Ed didn't see horror. He saw company. He created masks to mimic faces he missed. Bowls, corsets, lamps, belts, each item a warped attempt to rebuild a world he believed he had lost. His farmhouse, once ruled by religious judgment, became a workshop of nightmares. Still, Ed lived as though nothing were wrong. He chatted politely with townsfolk, helped neighbors, ate dinner with families who pitied him. People joked that Ed was odd, but harmless. They didn't know he spent his nights sewing skin. They didn't know the cemetery dirt under his nails wasn't from yard work. They didn't know he talked to the things he built. Plainfield remained blind. But Ed was changing, slowly, inevitably. The graveyards no longer satisfied him. The projects no longer felt complete. He needed something more, something fresher, something alive. And soon, a woman named Mary Hogan would disappear from her tavern without a trace.